So people are freaking out over this Confederate Memorial Day. Now, this was Monday. But I'm starting to see a lot of articles pop up over the past day or so. They've been popping up about this holiday, depending on where you are in the South. Some states in the South still celebrate it, some don't. But I want to focus on the study because there was an article about this over at The Root. But I want to focus on the study going back to 2021 because they had an article about this study listed somewhere in this article about Monday. I think Kentucky celebrates Confederate Memorial Day June 3rd, somewhere around there. But you go and you read these articles, and they have to make all these corrections because they can't get their own information right. They can't get it right. Now, to clear the air here, no, I'm not a Confederate sympathizer. Yes, I grew up in the South. Yes, I have a Confederate battle flag. But I also have a Betsy Ross flag. I have a Bonnie Blue flag. I love being an American. And I can use logic and reason to figure things out. I don't believe in a Republican Democrat. And back in the day, the Democrats were actually, at that time, 1860, 1861, the Democrats were actually the conservatives in that era. And the Republicans then were the liberals, or what we would consider liberal today. But at any rate, so here are the headlines that are out there about this Confederate Memorial Day. Clarion Ledger, today is Confederate Memorial Day. Why does Mississippi still celebrate it, and what does it mean? You see, there has to be a hidden meaning here. It must be about racism and sexism and homophobia, white supremacy, slavery. It's all about slavery. Over at the Mississippi Free Press, Mississippi holiday honors those who died defending slavery with offices closed for Confederate Memorial Day. Mississippi holiday honors those who died defending slavery. I'll read you a snippet of that article here in a moment. Then over at the Florida Times-Union, Jacksonville, Saturday is Confederate Memorial Day in Florida. Why does Florida still celebrate it? Oh, I don't know, maybe to remember those who died during the war? Because you see, the argument they're making here is that because these states seceded, we had a war. Well, that's not why we had a war. We had a conflict because Lincoln would accept the fact that the South left. They said, see you later. He wouldn't accept it. And the war started because you had the Union come down to Charleston Harbor. Remember, they didn't have the internet in that time period, or in those days. But they thought it was an act of war, so they shot back. That's what happened. And that started the war. You see, the war happened after these states seceded. It didn't happen when they seceded. So you got to get the timeline right here. Florida Times-Union, Mississippi Free Press. Did I say press? I mean press. So at any rate, it's late. I'm doing this in one take again. So at any rate, those are the headlines that are out there about this. But I want to go to the root because they had this article going back to 2021. Now, they had an article this week talking about this. But they had this study, an article about a study, University of Virginia, 2021. And in this study, they were trying to show the correlation between the number of lynchings and Confederate memorials, statues. Wherever you had a Confederate symbol, there was bound to be a lynching. Well, all it took me was less than 2 minutes to go to Tuskegee.edu, Tuskegee Institute, and look at these lynchings that occurred between 1882 and 1968. Now, in the study, they do it 1832 to 1950, I believe it is. But all you had to do was look this up, and you can quickly debunk the argument here, and they actually backtrack in this article at the end of the article. But let me read you a snippet just to show you the amount of hatred people have for this thing called the Confederacy. Even though we are all Confederate, because that's how the United States was originally formed, as a confederacy, which became a federal republic, but states still maintained their sovereignty, their independence. They gave up a little bit of that in exchange for this thing called the Constitution, but it was always understood that states reserved certain rights protected by the Constitution. Mississippi holiday honors those who died defending slavery with offices closed for Confederate Memorial Day. May have mentioned that title earlier, but giving that title to you again. And they've got a picture here going back to, when was it, 2020. Remember 2020? The good old days. The good old days. So it says here, state offices in Mississippi are closed today to commemorate the men who died fighting the United States government to protect the institution of human slavery. They died to protect the institution of human slavery. Well, I'm a little confused here, because if you're talking about human slavery, can we include slavery in ancient Rome, Greece, Egypt, Persia? What about slavery in Africa? Funny, that's not mentioned in this article or in this paragraph. Confederate Memorial Day is a state holiday observed in several southern states. As in years past, the majority white Republican-led Mississippi legislature once again allowed a black Democrats bill to get rid of Confederate Memorial Day to die without a vote. That lawmaker, Senator Derrick Simmons of Greenville, wants to replace it with Juneteenth Freedom Day on June 19th. So you want to get rid of this Confederate Memorial Day because you believe it was all over slavery. That's what the war is about. Even though slavery didn't end until 1865, with the passing of the 13th Amendment, so it was legally recognized under the U.S. Constitution until that time. And New Jersey, for example, did not officially abolish slavery until December of 1865, early January 1866. You still had slaves in Santa Fe, I think a little over 400 in 1867. But you want to replace this Confederate Memorial Day with Juneteenth Freedom Day. Okay, celebrate the freeing of the slaves in the United States, but Africa was a major player in the slave trade, both the trans-Saharan and the Atlantic slave trade. So should we really be celebrating Juneteenth? Quote, to honor that cause with a state holiday is to glorify rebellion against the United States fought to defend the indefensible. He wrote an opinion piece for Mississippi Today, again going back to this Senator Derrick Simmons of Greenville. Derrick Simmons of Greenville, South Carolina. Quote, it is an insult to every citizen who believes in equality and freedom. It is a cruel slap in the face to black Americans whose ancestors endured the horrors of slavery and generations of systemic discrimination that followed. Trying to get the words out. Well, what about discrimination against groups like the Chinese or the Irish or the Italians? Because I have it right here, since he brought it up. Let me find it here. Have it in my notes here. I believe it's at the National something Institute. And it shows here that in the 1870s, let me see if I have my notes. Give me a moment here, folks. I'm going to see if I can find this. But they talk about James Z. George, who is, I think, a friend of Jefferson Davis. Okay, here it is. Sorry, folks. Sometimes you do these videos and you lose a page. So Mississippi Encyclopedia talks about this. How James Z. George, how he was elected to the Mississippi Supreme Court and elected Chief Justice, served on the Board of Trustees of both the University of Mississippi and the Agricultural and Mechanical College of the State of Mississippi, etc. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1880, won re-election in 1886 and 1892. And even though he favored disenfranchisement, he pointed to the same practices that were being done in the North in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. So who's the racist one here? The South? People in the North? Maybe it was just the time period. They were just as anti-black as they were, or anti-freedmen as they were anti-Irish and anti-Italian, anti-Chinese. Leland Stanford, 1862. His State of the State address called the Chinese an inferior race. So let's get to this study here. Again, over at the Root, story about this. Title of the article, again going back to 2021, counties with more Confederate statues had more lynchings. Story by Terrell Germain Starr. This was published October 14th, 2021. Let me enlarge this here real quick. And they've got a picture here of one of these Confederate monuments being taken down. But it says here, a study from the University of Virginia published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences this week found that counties in ex-Confederate states with more Confederate memorials had more lynchings. Led by social psychology researcher Geisha Henderson, data scientist Samuel Powers, and Professor Sophie Trewalter, Michelle Claiborne, and Jasmine Brown Iannuzzi, I think it is, Iannuzzi, at UVA's Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. The study, they concluded, quote, provides compelling evidence that these symbols are associated with hate and racism and not more inconspicuous things like heritage or Southern pride. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So it's all about hate. It's all about racism, sexism, homophobia, and not about heritage or Southern pride. But then they backtrack. So at the very end of the article, they admit here that they did not do the study in states where lynchings happen with minorities that were not part of the Confederacy or did not have Confederate statues. So you just shot yourself in the foot. You just shot yourself in the foot. This goes to show you the desperation of these people. But let me give you a couple of these numbers here. This is at Tuskegee.edu. A lot to say tonight. So they break this down, 1882 to 1968. So I'll just go through a few of these for the sake of time. Now, yes, there were a lot of lynchings in the South, and you can make the argument there were more in the South compared to other parts of the country. But you're talking about this large time span, 1882 to 1968. That's a relatively long time. Alabama, 48 whites compared to 299 blacks. Arizona, 31 whites, no blacks. Arkansas, 58 to 226, for a total of 284. Florida, you had 25 whites who were lynched compared to 257 blacks, for a total of 282. In Idaho, 20 whites. Illinois, 15 whites, 19 black. Kansas, 35 whites, 19 blacks. In Kentucky, 63 whites, 142 blacks. And in Utah, you had 6 whites and 2 blacks that were lynched over this time period, for a total of 8. So, are you trying to make the argument here that if you didn't have these Confederate monuments, you wouldn't have these lynchings? So it sounds like to me. And you didn't even bother to go to these other states, do studies in these other states that didn't have Confederate memorials or statues where lynchings took place. And there's an article at the LA Times that talks about a Native American back, I think, in 1852 who was lynched because he was accused of murder. You had several Latinos that were lynched in California. So it sounds to me, when you look at things as a whole here, it was all over the place. But no, they gotta prove once again that somehow the South is evil. We gotta replace Confederate Memorial Day with Juneteenth. How about having a celebration that celebrates it all? The end of the war, the freeing of the slaves, remembering those who died during the war. Why not do that? Makes sense, right? So I thought I'd share this with you. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. You can follow me at Instagram, #JasonComposes, because I write music in my spare time. You can go to X, Culture Confederacy, at Culture Confed 1 on X. Now you can find me at Substack. This is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out. Stay safe, everybody. God bless this thing called the United States. I'll catch you next time, and y'all have a great Wednesday night. Take care.